It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I found out that my life was no longer the one I had worked so hard to build. I had just come home from a quiet day at work, hoping to unwind after a long week of balancing everything. I was 62 years old, and though I had grown tired over the years, I never imagined my life would take such an unexpected turn. I still remember the way the house felt when I walked in, the warmth of familiarity, the scent of my husband's cologne lingering in the air, but something was different, something in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite put my finger on. I hung my coat by the door and called out his name. "Jim, are you home?" I waited for an answer, but all I heard was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. It wasn't like him to not respond. Slowly, I walked to the living room, expecting to see him sitting on the couch, maybe watching a game or reading the paper. But when I opened the door, I froze. There, on the coffee table, was a letter, his handwriting unmistakable. It was addressed to me. The letter was simple enough, a few sentences that shook my world completely. Jim was leaving. He was going back to his ex-wife, Carol. He said it had been a mistake for us to continue after all these years. My heart sank as I read his words. I had known he wasn't happy for a while, but I never imagined it would end like this, with him leaving me for a woman he had been married to before. After all the years, the sacrifices, the memories, this was how he chose to walk away. Without even a real conversation, just a letter. I couldn't understand it. We had been through so much together. There was a time, many years ago, when we'd been inseparable. We built a life together. My mind flashed back to the days when I helped him with everything, when I supported him through tough times. I'd put everything on hold for him, working jobs I didn't want to, making sure his dreams came true. But now, all that seemed forgotten. He was gone. I sat down on the couch, my hands trembling as I reread the letter. A flood of emotions washed over me, hurt, confusion, disbelief. But somewhere beneath all of it, there was anger. Jim had left me for Carol, the same woman who had caused so much pain for him and me in the past. How could he do this? How could he just walk out without any explanation, any real reason? As I sat there trying to process it all, a realization hit me. Carol wasn't just his ex-wife anymore. She was someone I knew more about than I had ever imagined. For the past year, I had been working as a manager at a high-end consulting firm, and to my surprise, Carol had applied for a job there. I had hired her without even realizing the connection. She had slipped into the company like anyone else, her resume impressive and her skills undeniable. But the more I worked with her, the more I began to see her for what she really was: manipulative, clever, and above all, persistent. I had no idea that she was secretly trying to rekindle her relationship with Jim. The truth stung. Carol, who had once been a thorn in my side, was now playing a game I hadn't even known I was part of. And Jim? He didn't even know that the woman he was running back to was working right under my nose, the same woman I had unknowingly become her boss. The whole situation felt like a cruel twist of fate. Jim leaving me for Carol, and here I was, holding all the power, yet still feeling completely betrayed. It was a strange mixture of emotions: power, anger, and a touch of sorrow. I was the one who had built this life, supported Jim, and made sacrifices for both of us. Now, I was stuck in a strange game, watching from the sidelines as they played their parts without ever realizing the real dynamic at play. And all the while, I felt my world slipping away. I had a choice to make. Would I let them tear apart everything I had worked for? Would I allow Jim and Carol to destroy me? Or would I use the situation to reclaim my life in a way I had never imagined? The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. I was no longer going to be the woman they could walk all over, but I didn't know yet how I was going to make them realize that. The days that followed were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to confront Jim, Not just yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what I would do next. But it was hard to ignore the gnawing feeling that kept creeping up, a feeling that, no matter how I tried to push it away, seemed to grow stronger with every passing hour. Carol, she was the one who had caused all of this, the one who had lured Jim back with her manipulations. But as much as I wanted to point the finger at her, something was holding me back. It was as if I were waiting for something, something I couldn't yet name. I spent most of my time at work trying to keep busy. Each day felt like I was sinking further into a world I didn't recognize. People at the office noticed I was distracted, but I kept up appearances, forcing smiles, answering emails, doing what I was supposed to do. Carol was always there, working quietly by my side, and the tension between us was palpable. I knew she could sense it. There were moments when she would glance at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite read, perhaps guilt, perhaps satisfaction. But I never confronted her. I couldn't, not yet. It was one evening, as I was leaving the office late, that it finally hit me. I had been trying so hard to avoid the truth, to pretend I could live in a world where everything was still normal, but nothing was normal anymore. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was someone who had more power than I ever realized. I had the one thing Carol never expected. I had leverage. I had been working for years in a position of authority, managing not just the company but many of the people in it, including Carol. And though she had played her role, charming everyone around her with her professional demeanor, I knew the truth. I knew how she operated. I knew how manipulative she could be, how she used her past relationship with Jim to try and get what she wanted, and I was in a position to stop her. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. I was in control. Not Jim, not Carol. I was the one who held the power now. They were both clueless, caught up in their own desires and emotions, but they didn't realize the game had changed. I wasn't going to sit back and watch my life crumble. If Jim thought he could just walk away and pick up where he left off with Carol, he was wrong. I would make sure he understood that he had underestimated me. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but it was the only way forward. I was going to use my position, my authority, and everything I had worked for to turn this around. I would make sure they both realized that nothing, not their history, not their past, would give them a free pass to treat me like this. The next day, Carol came into my office as usual. She looked more confident than ever, a smile on her face, but I could tell she was nervous. Maybe she had sensed the shift in me. Maybe she was wondering if I knew more than I let on. I didn't say anything. Instead, I just looked at her, my gaze cold and steady, and waited for her to speak first. Her voice was smooth as always, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it now. "Margaret, I've been thinking about the project we discussed last week. I believe it's time we move forward with the next phase," she said, her words calculated, as if she were trying to regain control of the situation. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, Carol, I've been thinking about that too. But before we proceed, I need to have a more detailed conversation about your role here. I think we need to set some clearer boundaries." The shock that flashed across her face was almost satisfying. She had expected me to be weak, to fold under the pressure of her charm and Jim's betrayal. But she didn't know me. She didn't know the woman I had become, the woman who had given up so much for everyone else, only to be cast aside like an old coat when I was no longer useful. I wasn't going to let that happen anymore. "Boundaries?" she repeated, her voice faltering for the first time since we'd worked together. "I don't understand, Margaret." I leaned forward slightly, keeping my voice calm but firm. "You see, Carol, things have changed. I'm no longer just your colleague. I'm your superior, and I expect you to respect that. No more games, no more manipulation. If you want to keep working here, you'll need to adjust your behavior. And if you're planning on continuing your little affair with Jim, you'll need to make sure you don't bring that into the office. This is business, not personal." Her face turned red with anger, but she didn't argue. She knew I had her trapped. This was no longer about who Jim chose. It was about power, and right now, I held all the cards. Carol left my office in silence, but the tension in the air lingered. It wasn't over yet. This was only the beginning. But I had made my move, and now I could only wait to see how Jim and Carol would react. The next few days were full of tension, but I kept my focus on work. I knew Carol would try to push back against the boundaries I had set, and sure enough, it didn't take long for her to start testing me. She was the kind of woman who didn't like being told what to do, especially not by someone like me. But this time, I wasn't going to let her get away with it. One afternoon, as I was reviewing some documents in my office, my assistant came in, looking a little flustered. "Miss Turner," she said, "Carol's outside. She wants to speak with you." I didn't hesitate. "Send her in." Carol walked in like she owned the place, her high heels clicking against the polished floor with each step. She was all smiles, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. She wasn't used to people standing up to her, and it was clear she wasn't about to let me set the rules without a fight. "Margaret," she said sweetly, but her voice held an edge. "I hope you're not taking my words personally. I just think we need to discuss the situation with Jim. I mean, he's still my husband in many ways, and you and I both know that things can get complicated." I stared at her, unimpressed. I had expected her to use Jim as a shield, and now she was doing exactly that. She always played the victim, trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. But I wasn't going to let her, not this time. "I'm not concerned with your relationship with Jim, Carol," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What concerns me is your behavior at work. I've made it clear that I expect you to act professionally. If you can't do that, then we'll have to have a different conversation." Her smile faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Margaret, I understand. I'll make sure to keep things professional." But I knew better. This wasn't about professionalism for Carol. This was about control. She wanted to control Jim, and now she was trying to control me. What she didn't realize was that the tables had turned. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I spent the next few days keeping a close eye on her, making sure she didn't try anything underhanded. It was clear she wasn't going to back down easily. She would continue to test my patience, push my boundaries, and try to manipulate me in every way she could. But I was ready. Then, on the following Friday, I got a call that sent a chill down my spine. It was from Jim. I hadn't heard from him since the letter. Part of me wanted to ignore the call, to let him wallow in whatever mess he had created for himself. But another part of me needed answers. I couldn't just move on without understanding what had happened, what went wrong. I picked up the phone, my hand trembling slightly. "Jim." There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice sounding hesitant. "Margaret, I know things have been difficult. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what happened. Carol and I were trying to make things work again, but I want you to know that I never wanted to lose you. I thought you'd understand." Understand? I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I bit my lip and tried to keep my composure. "Jim, it's not about understanding, it's about respect. You left me for your ex-wife, the woman who hurt you so many times before, and now you expect me to just forgive you? To accept it?" His voice wavered, and I could hear the guilt in his words. "I didn't know what else to do. You were always so strong, Margaret. I guess I couldn't live up to that. I thought going back to Carol would make things easier, but I was wrong." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see it. "Jim, this isn't about me. It's about you. It's about you running away from responsibility. You're always looking for someone to fix things for you. But I can't fix you anymore. You've made your choice." There was silence on the other end. I knew he was processing my words, maybe even feeling the weight of his actions. But it didn't matter anymore. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to wait around for him to fix everything. "I'm done, Jim," I said, my voice firm. "We're done." I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. It was over. For good. But just as I set the phone down, a thought crossed my mind. Jim might be gone, but Carol was still here, still working in my office, still trying to manipulate her way back into Jim's life. She might have thought she had won, but she hadn't. Not yet. I had already made up my mind. It was time to take control, not just of my marriage, but of my life. I wasn't going to let Carol win. I wasn't going to let her have Jim or my peace of mind. The battle was far from over, but I was ready. I would make sure Carol understood the real meaning of power, because now I had it all. The following weeks passed in a blur of silence, yet the tension never left. I could feel the weight of the situation hanging over me, like a cloud that wouldn't dissipate. Jim had tried calling a few more times, but I refused to answer. Each time I felt my resolve growing stronger. I had made the right choice, hadn't I? He had betrayed me for Carol, and now he wanted me to just forgive him, to let him back in. But I knew better. He hadn't changed, and the truth was, I didn't need him. I had already survived so much without him. At work, Carol's behavior had shifted too. I noticed her more around the office, trying to remain professional, but her attempts to get back into my good graces were clear. She'd offer me fake smiles or try to engage in small talk, but I wasn't fooled. I saw right through her. She was still playing the same game, still trying to make me feel small, trying to assert herself as someone above me. But what she didn't know was that I had already taken control. She didn't realize that everything she was doing, every small gesture she made, was under my watchful eye. One afternoon, she came into my office, a little too eager, a little too polished. "Margaret," she said with a tight smile, "I was wondering if we could discuss the upcoming project and the team's performance. I know things have been a bit tense lately, but I really think we can work together to get things back on track." I looked up at her from behind my desk, my expression unreadable. She was playing her hand again, pretending like nothing had happened. But I could see the underlying desperation in her eyes. She wanted something from me. I could feel it, but this time I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. "Carol," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I think we need to have a clear understanding here. I'm still your boss. Nothing about that has changed. So I expect professionalism, no more games. If you want to discuss the project, we can do that. But don't come in here trying to act like nothing happened, because things have changed, and you need to respect that." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I saw her mask slip. She was taken aback, not used to someone standing up to her. She had always used her charm, her past with Jim, to get what she wanted. But now I was the one in charge. The tables had turned, and she didn't know how to handle it. "Of course," she replied, her voice still smooth but a little more strained now. "I'll respect that. We'll keep things professional." But I could see the uncertainty in her gaze. She was calculating her next move, trying to figure out how to regain control. And that was when I realized the extent of her manipulation. She had been using her relationship with Jim to play me, to undermine me. But now she was trapped in a situation she couldn't control. I had the power now. I was in the driver's seat, and Carol was the one on the back foot. The next day, I called a meeting with my team, including Carol. I had to make sure everyone understood the new dynamic. I wasn't going to let this situation drag on any longer. The moment Carol stepped into the room, I could feel the tension rise. She knew what was coming. She could see it in my eyes. "Listen up, everyone," I began, my tone authoritative. "We've got a project to focus on, and I need all of you to give your best. This company depends on each of us doing our part. There will be no more distractions, no more side conversations about things that don't concern this office. From now on, everything is about professionalism and respect. If anyone has any issues with that, they can leave now." There was a brief silence as my words sank in, and then I turned to Carol. "Is that clear, Carol?" I asked, making sure she understood the full weight of my message. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded, her eyes flashing with anger. "Understood, Margaret," she said, though I could hear the bite in her voice. "Good. Let her be angry. Let her simmer in it. I wasn't backing down, and neither was the team. From that point on, I made sure to keep everything strictly professional. Carol's manipulations were no longer effective against me, but as much as I tried to focus on work, Jim's presence loomed in the back of my mind. I had shut him out, refused to take his calls, but I knew he would try again. And the longer he stayed away, the more I realized how much he had taken me for granted. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, I received a text message. It was from Jim. It simply read, "I'm sorry, Margaret. Please, let's talk. I don't know what to do anymore." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. I had already made my decision. There was nothing more to say. I wasn't going to let him worm his way back into my life, not after everything he had done. But something in me couldn't quite ignore the pull. Maybe it was the years we had spent together. Maybe it was the feeling of loneliness that crept in when I thought about how much I had given for that marriage. But then I remembered something. I didn't need him. I didn't need Carol. I had been standing on my own for far longer than I realized. I had already survived without him, and I would continue to survive without either of them. I deleted the message without replying, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The past was the past. It was time to move forward. The following week, I found myself more at ease. There was a new quiet confidence in me that I hadn't felt before. I had made my decision about Jim and Carol, and I was sticking to it. It wasn't about revenge or bitterness anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my independence, and my peace. The constant feeling of being pulled in different directions, trying to please others and live up to expectations, was slowly starting to fade. I was finally in control of my own story. At work, the atmosphere had shifted as well. Carol had become more subdued, trying her best to follow the rules I had set. She still held on to the hope that somehow she could regain her former influence, but it was becoming clearer by the day that I wasn't the same woman who had been willing to let her walk all over me. The dynamic was changing, and though she didn't like it, there was nothing she could do. The power balance had shifted, and I was no longer the one left feeling powerless. One afternoon, I was reviewing some project files when I received an unexpected visitor, one of my colleagues who had been with the company for years. He came into my office looking unusually serious. "Margaret," he began, "I don't know if you've heard, but Jim's been trying to reach you. I overheard him talking about coming to your office, trying to get you to meet him." My heart skipped a beat. Even though I had moved on, even though I had made peace with it all, the mention of Jim's name still stirred something inside me. I hadn't expected him to show up at work, but it seemed like he was determined to keep fighting for a place in my life, no matter what it took. I was torn between annoyance and curiosity. Why couldn't he just let go? "Thank you for letting me know," I said, my voice steady but a little tight. "But I don't think there's anything left to talk about." He nodded, though there was a look of concern in his eyes. "Just be careful. He's desperate. I've seen him pacing outside, and he looks like he's about to lose it." I appreciated his warning, but part of me felt an unexpected sense of power. Jim had always been the one who couldn't handle things, who ran when things got tough. Now the roles were reversed. I wasn't running, I was standing my ground, and this time I wasn't going to let him in again. After my colleague left, I sat in my office for a while, letting the silence settle around me. It was almost peaceful. The thought of Jim and Carol still together, still playing their games, didn't bother me as much anymore. It didn't hurt. Instead, I felt a sense of detachment. I had my life, my work, and a future that I was starting to carve out on my own terms. That night, as I was about to turn in for the evening, my phone buzzed again. It was Jim. I stared at the screen for a moment before hitting ignore. Then, for the first time in a long time, I smiled. I had made the right choice. It was over, and I was free. The next morning, as I walked into the office, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The day was crisp, and the world seemed to be moving forward just like me. I greeted my staff with a quiet confidence, handling the day's tasks with ease. Even Carol seemed to have accepted the new boundaries I had set for her. There were no more passive-aggressive comments or attempts to test my authority. It felt good. I was finally able to focus on the work that mattered, and my career began to feel like mine again, not something I had been doing to please others. But there was one thing still hanging over me: Jim. He hadn't given up. Despite my rejection, he was still trying to worm his way back into my life. The messages kept coming, and the calls didn't stop. I was beginning to feel like a pawn in a game I had long since stopped caring about. But this time, I wouldn't be dragged back in. That afternoon, I found myself standing at the window of my office, looking out at the bustling city below. It had been a few weeks since I had truly processed everything: Jim's betrayal, Carol's manipulations, and my own awakening. And now it was time to finish this chapter. I didn't need Jim to complete me. I didn't need Carol's approval. I had spent years giving to others, sacrificing my own happiness, but now it was time to turn that focus inward. I would no longer let my past define my future. As I stood there, a wave of clarity washed over me. I had worked hard for everything I had. I had earned my place, and now no one, not Jim, not Carol, would take that away from me. I didn't need to apologize for setting boundaries or for choosing my own happiness. I had spent so many years trying to make everyone else happy, but this time it was my turn. The next day, I finally replied to Jim's messages. I wasn't going to let him drag me into another emotional whirlpool. I needed closure, and I would get it on my terms. I typed a short message. Jim, I've made my decision. It's over. Please respect that. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The uncertainty, the guilt, the fear of the unknown, it all seemed to fade. It wasn't easy, but it was the right choice. I put the phone down and looked out the window again. The city was still moving, people were still living their lives, and so was I. And this time, I was living it for me, not for Jim, not for Carol, just for me, and that felt like freedom. The following days passed without much drama. For the first time in months, I woke up each morning with a sense of calm. There was no gnawing anxiety about Jim's calls or Carol's manipulations. I could finally breathe. The weight that had been pressing on my chest was lifting, piece by piece. I focused on my work, and surprisingly, I found myself thriving. The office was starting to feel like a place where I could truly lead, not just a place I went to pass the time. People began respecting me more, and I wasn't just the boss anymore. I was a force to be reckoned with. Carol, however, wasn't done yet. She still tried to undermine me, though it was becoming clear that her attempts were failing. I would see her during meetings, her eyes darting around, searching for ways to twist the narrative in her favor. But I stayed calm, firm in my decisions, and each time she tried to play her old tricks, I shut them down without hesitation. I no longer had time for her games. She was in my office now, and I was in charge. One afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway. "Margaret, can we talk for a moment?" she asked, her tone overly sweet. I turned to face her, not even bothering to hide my skepticism. "About what?" "I just wanted to clear the air," she said, her smile tight. "I know things have been a little tense lately, but I think we can work things out, don't you? We don't have to let this affect the office. We're both professionals after all." I studied her for a moment. I could tell she was trying to charm me again, to make me feel like I was the one overreacting, but I wasn't falling for it this time. No, Carol, it's over. We don't need to work this out. I'm your boss now, and that's all you need to focus on. Nothing personal, just business. Her smile faltered for a split second before she quickly recovered. I see. Well, I just wanted to be clear. I don't want any tension between us. I still think we can make this work. I nodded slowly, my voice steady. I'm sure you do, but I don't think we'll be working together for much longer. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? I mean, I said, taking a step closer to her, that I don't tolerate manipulation. And if you think you're going to keep playing games with me, you're wrong. There are consequences for that, and I'm not afraid to make sure you understand that. Carol's face turned pale, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. She was used to controlling everything around her, but now I was the one holding the power. Without saying another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there. I didn't care what she did after that. The battle had already been won. The following week, something unexpected happened. I was in the middle of a meeting when I received a call from my lawyer. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had been working on a few routine matters, and I assumed it was just an update on one of them. But when I answered, the tone of the conversation quickly shifted. "Margaret, we need to talk about something serious," my lawyer said, her voice grave. "It's about Jim." My heart skipped a beat. I had hoped I was done with him, that he would finally accept that our marriage was over. But apparently, I was wrong. "Jim?" I asked, my voice suddenly tight. "What about him?" "He's filed a petition," she said, pausing. "He's trying to claim part of your assets, including the house. He says that you owe him financial compensation for the years you spent together." I was stunned. I had expected Jim to try to get me back emotionally, but this? This was an outright attempt to take what was mine. He was trying to use our divorce as a way to get his hands on what I had worked so hard to build. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The anger that bubbled up inside me was unlike anything I had felt before. How dare he? After everything, after the betrayal, after he walked out on me for Carol, now he thought he could come back and claim what was mine? I took a deep breath and steadied myself. "I won't let him do this," I said, my voice firm. "I worked for everything I have. I'm not going to let him take it from me." My lawyer agreed. "We can fight this, Margaret. He doesn't have a leg to stand on, but we need to act quickly." I didn't hesitate. "Do what you need to do. I'm not going to let him walk all over me again." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Jim had crossed a line. This wasn't about closure or moving on. This was about control, about trying to take what he thought he deserved. But this time, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. The fight had just begun, but this time, I wasn't backing down. I had already come too far to let him ruin everything. The game had changed, and this time, I was in charge. The legal battle with Jim felt like an uphill struggle, but I refused to let it break me. It wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about standing up for everything I had worked for, my independence, my career, and my right to live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. I wasn't going to let him take that away from me, not after everything he had done. In the weeks that followed, the tension grew. I had my lawyer working tirelessly on the case, and every time I saw Jim's name on my phone, my blood boiled. He was relentless, sending message after message, trying to manipulate me into backing down. But I wasn't falling for it this time. At work, Carol seemed to notice the change in me. She had been watching my every move, waiting for any sign of weakness, but all she saw was strength. The more I stood my ground with her, the more unsettled she became. She could no longer manipulate the situation, no longer pull the strings behind the scenes. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself, and that gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction. I had worked my way into a position of power, and I wasn't about to let her take it away from me. Then one day, as I was walking into the office, I received a message from my lawyer. It was an update on the case, and it felt like the world had shifted beneath me. Jim had backed down. He had finally agreed to drop the petition, though the terms weren't without some negotiation. He would still receive some of the assets, but not nearly as much as he had hoped. I couldn't help but feel a rush of triumph. Jim had underestimated me. I had won. I sat at my desk that afternoon looking out the window. The weight that had been pressing on me for so long was finally lifting. I had fought for my life, my dignity, and my future, and now I was free. But as the days passed, I realized something else. This victory, this sense of closure, didn't just come from the legal battle. It came from within. I had spent so many years putting others first, sacrificing my happiness for the sake of my marriage, my career, and the people around me. But now I was living for myself. It wasn't about the money or the house. It was about me reclaiming my life, my worth, and my peace. Jim and Carol had tried to break me, but they hadn't succeeded. The day I received the official confirmation that the legal battle was over, I couldn't help but smile. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Jim's persistence had almost broken me, but in the end I had come out stronger. I had finally taken control of my life, and there was nothing anyone could do to take that away from me. That evening, I sat in my favorite armchair, sipping a cup of tea and reflecting on the journey. It hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decisions. But now, as I looked back, I knew I had done what was best for me. I had let go of the toxic ties that had bound me to Jim and Carol, and I was free. The next morning, as I walked into the office, something felt different. There was a new sense of clarity in my step, a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just walking into a job anymore, I was walking into my future. Carol was still there, of course, but now the power dynamic had shifted. She couldn't manipulate me anymore. I had put up with her antics for far too long, but now I had the upper hand. I was the one in control, and I wasn't afraid to show it. As I passed her in the hallway, she tried to catch my eye, her usual smile plastered on her face. But I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes forward, my confidence unwavering. The truth was, Carol was no longer a threat. She had tried to use her past with Jim to control me, to make me feel small, but I had learned my lesson. I wasn't going to let anyone take away my sense of self-worth again. I could see it in her eyes. She was frustrated, trying to figure out why her old tricks weren't working. But it didn't matter. I had moved on from her, from Jim, from the life I had once known. I was carving out a new path, one that was mine alone. By the time I reached my office, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The battle was over. I had won. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe easy. It wasn't just the legal victory. It was the realization that I had taken back my life. Jim, Carol, none of them mattered anymore. I was free, and that was enough. The days that followed were nothing short of liberating. I had won my battle with Jim, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living for myself. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to worry about Jim or Carol trying to dictate my life. They were in the past now, and I was moving forward. At work, things were more peaceful than they had been in months. Carol had grown quieter, perhaps realizing that her influence over me had finally faded. I could tell she was still trying to maintain control in small ways, but I was no longer the woman who would let her. I was no longer the woman who needed approval from anyone to feel validated. I had my own strength now. One evening, I received a call from an old friend. Her voice on the other end was warm, filled with excitement. "Margaret, I just heard the news. Jim dropped the petition, didn't he? How are you holding up?" I smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "I'm doing great. It's over. I'm done with all of it." She let out a soft laugh. "You've been through so much. You deserve this peace. You know, I've been meaning to ask, have you thought about what you want to do next? You've always had this incredible potential, Margaret. You deserve to live your life fully now." Her words struck me. She was right. I had spent so many years living for others, always trying to fix things, always sacrificing for people who never appreciated it. I had given up so much of myself to keep things afloat, to keep the peace. But now I was free to live for me. "I don't know what's next," I replied, my voice thoughtful, "but I'm excited to find out." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the things I had put on hold. I thought about the places I had wanted to visit, the dreams I had shelved for so long. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who had believed she needed to sacrifice everything to keep others happy. And then I thought about the woman I was becoming, someone who had finally found the strength to put herself first. The future felt wide open to me, filled with possibilities. I didn't need Jim. I didn't need Carol. I needed only myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The following weeks were a journey of self-discovery. I started small. I signed up for an art class I had been wanting to take for years, but never had the time to. I took long walks in the park, letting the fresh air fill my lungs and clear my mind. I started cooking again, not just quick meals to get by, but dishes I truly enjoyed, experimenting with new ingredients and flavors. I also began to reconnect with old friends, those I had lost touch with while I was caught up in the chaos of my marriage and the toxic influence of Jim and Carol. One evening, I had dinner with a close friend from my past, someone who had always seen me for who I really was. She smiled at me across the table, her eyes filled with admiration. "You look so different, Margaret," she said, stirring her drink. "You look like you're finally living for yourself. You've always had so much to give, but now I can see that you're giving it to yourself. I'm so proud of you." Her words were like a balm to my soul. It was one thing to know that I was moving forward, but it was another to hear it from someone else. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen, not as Jim's wife, not as Carol's rival, but as me, just me. I knew I was still healing. I knew there would be days when the past would try to creep back into my thoughts, when the memories of my marriage would resurface. But I also knew that I was stronger now. I had survived the storm, and now I was walking toward the light. There were moments when I still thought about Jim, mostly in flashes, reminders of the years we had spent together. I would occasionally remember the good times, the times when we laughed and dreamed together, but those memories didn't hurt as much anymore. They were just that, memories. And memories were meant to be left in the past, where they belonged. I had found my peace, and that was the greatest gift I could have ever given myself. The future, with all its unknowns, no longer seemed so daunting. It was mine to shape however I wanted. And as I looked out at the sunset one evening, a smile spread across my face. For the first time in a long time, I was excited about what was to come. The world was wide open, and I was ready to embrace it on my own terms. The next few months were filled with small, satisfying victories. I started to feel like I was truly coming into my own, leaving behind the woman who had spent so many years clinging to the past and finally stepping into the future. Each day felt like a new chapter, one where I no longer had to shrink myself for anyone else. I threw myself into my hobbies, rekindling old passions that had been pushed aside for too long. I spent weekends exploring new places in the city, rediscovering the joy of solo adventures. There were quiet moments too, moments when I would sit on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling a deep sense of contentment. At work, I had also gained more respect. My team saw the changes in me, and I saw it in the way they interacted with me. I no longer had to fight for their attention or prove myself. They understood that I was someone who knew what she wanted, who wasn't afraid to make the tough decisions. Even Carol seemed to accept that things had shifted. While she never fully gave up on her schemes, Her efforts felt futile against the confident, decisive person I had become. And then one afternoon, out of nowhere, I received a call from my lawyer. I hadn't heard from her in a while, and part of me dreaded what the conversation would be about. But when I picked up the phone, I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Margaret, I've got some good news. Jim has decided to settle. He's finally agreed to sign the papers without any more drama. It's over. The case is closed. It's official." I felt an unexpected rush of relief flood through me. It was done. Jim was finally out of my life for good. There would be no more phone calls, no more threats, no more pretending like he could waltz back in and demand a place in my world. The weight I had carried for so long was gone. All those years of trying to please him, to fix things, to fight for a relationship that had long since stopped being healthy, they were in the past now. And I realized in that moment that I was more than just okay. I was stronger than I had ever been. I had weathered the storm and come out on the other side unscathed. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, allowing myself to feel the gravity of what I had accomplished. It wasn't just the legal victory. It was the realization that I had taken my life back. In the weeks that followed, the changes in me became more apparent. I moved through life with a renewed sense of freedom, like a bird that had been confined for too long and was finally able to spread its wings. I started to look at the world through new eyes. The things I had once taken for granted, my health, my independence, my ability to make choices for myself, all of it felt like a gift. I found myself reconnecting with old friends, the ones who had always been there but had faded into the background while I was preoccupied with my marriage. I had been so focused on keeping Jim and Carol happy, on maintaining the peace, that I had forgotten what it felt like to have true supportive relationships. Now I was cultivating those friendships again. I was nurturing bonds that had always been there, waiting for me to rediscover them. And then something unexpected happened. A few months after the case was closed, I was contacted by a former colleague who had left the company years ago to start his own business. He had heard about my recent success and wanted to reconnect. At first I was hesitant, unsure of what this meant. But the more we talked, the more I realized that this was an opportunity, not just to rebuild a professional connection, but to explore a new path. We started discussing potential collaborations, and before long, I found myself considering a new venture, something I had never even thought about when I was married, something that had always been buried under years of shoulds and coulds. It was a project that tapped into my passions, something that truly excited me. The idea of it lit a spark in me that had been dormant for so long. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. There were no more doubts, no more hesitations. I could do anything I set my mind to. And as I moved forward with this new venture, I realized that this was the first time I had been living on my own terms. It wasn't about trying to please anyone or make them happy. It was about me, my dreams, and the future I was going to build for myself. The freedom I had fought for was finally mine, and it felt like the beginning of something truly remarkable. The weeks turned into months, and my life began to shift in ways I hadn't even imagined. With each new day, I felt more comfortable in my own skin, more at peace with who I was and where I was heading. The weight of the past had loosened its grip, and for the first time in a long while, I could breathe deeply without feeling like I was suffocating under expectations. The new venture I had started with my former colleague became something more than just a business opportunity. It became a passion project. I poured my energy into it with a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. There was a thrill that came with creating something of my own, something that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval or validation. It felt empowering to be able to make decisions based on what I truly wanted, not what I thought I should do to make others happy. Along the way, I learned that success didn't always mean following a set path or sticking to a blueprint that had been handed to me. Success for me meant freedom, the freedom to explore, to fail, and to rise again. It meant living life authentically, on my own terms, and as I saw the progress of the project, I realized that I had finally found my own voice again. Of course, there were still moments when I thought about Jim and Carol. The memories of the past would sneak up on me at the strangest times, but they didn't hold the same power over me anymore. Jim's betrayal, Carol's manipulations, they no longer defined me. They were just pieces of my story, parts of a chapter that had closed. And as I turned the page to the next chapter, I realized how much stronger I had become. I was no longer the woman who needed validation from anyone else. I was the woman who could stand on her own, face the world, and carve out the future she wanted. And then, something surprising happened. I received a call from my lawyer again, but this time, it wasn't about Jim or Carol. It was about an unexpected development that shook me. Apparently, Jim had made one last attempt to reach me, but this time, it wasn't about the past. It was about something entirely new, something I wasn't ready to hear. "Margaret," my lawyer said, her voice cautious, "Jim's reached out with an offer. He wants to buy you out of the house. He's willing to pay a significant amount. He says he's ready to move forward with his life and wants to settle everything." For a moment, I was silent. The idea of Jim offering to buy me out, to settle things once and for all, felt surreal. Was this his way of trying to right the wrongs he'd done? Or was it just another manipulation, another way for him to take something from me? But as I thought about it, I realized something important. I didn't need anything from him. I didn't need the house, and I certainly didn't need his money. What I had built for myself, what I had worked for, was far more valuable than anything he could offer. I declined his offer without hesitation. "Tell Jim to keep his money," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need him to buy me out of anything. I've already moved on." The relief that followed was instant. The last remnants of Jim's influence over me were gone. I had made my decision, and I was done. Done with the past, done with the people who had tried to control me. I was free, truly free, and it felt like the most empowering thing in the world. With each passing day, I continued to grow into the person I had always meant to be. The scars from my past were still there, but they no longer defined me. They had become part of the tapestry of my life, not the thread that held it all together. And as I look back, I realized that the greatest transformation hadn't come from the legal victories, the business ventures, or even the people who had tried to hold me back. The greatest transformation had come from within. I had learned to trust myself again, to listen to my own voice, and to put myself first. I had spent so many years giving to others, sacrificing pieces of myself for people who didn't appreciate it. But now I was reclaiming those pieces, stitching them back together to form a stronger, more complete version of who I was. In the months that followed, I found myself taking more risks, stepping out of my comfort zone, and embracing the unknown. I traveled to places I had always wanted to visit but had put off for too long. I explored new hobbies, new friendships, and new ways of thinking. Every new experience felt like a gift, a chance to rediscover myself and to live the life I had always dreamed of. One evening, as I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the city skyline, I realized something profound. I was no longer waiting for life to happen. I was making it happen. And for the first time in years, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had finally found my own path, my own rhythm. No longer did I need approval from Jim or Carol or anyone else. I had everything I needed within me. The future was mine to shape, and it was brighter than I had ever imagined. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I smiled to myself. The woman I had once been had been through so much, but she had finally found her way. And the woman I was now, the woman who had fought for her freedom, her happiness, and her future, she was unstoppable. The road ahead was open, and I was ready to walk it, head held high. The months continued to pass, and each one felt like a step forward into a new chapter of my life. With every new experience, I learned more about myself, about the strength I had buried deep within me. My business venture grew, slowly but steadily. It became something I was proud of, something that reflected not only my skills but my resilience. I had taken a chance on myself, and it was paying off in ways I hadn't expected. I also started to reconnect with people, friends who had been by my side through thick and thin. I had once pushed them away, focused entirely on the toxic relationship with Jim and the chaos that Carol had brought into my life. But now I was opening up again, letting them back in. It felt natural, like putting on a comfortable old sweater. They saw the change in me, and I saw the change in myself. We had all grown in different ways, but we were still there for each other. One afternoon, I was having coffee with an old friend, Sarah, when she asked me something I hadn't really thought about for a while. "Margaret," she said, stirring her drink thoughtfully, "have you ever thought about dating again?" The question took me by surprise. I hadn't even considered it. After everything that had happened with Jim, I had told myself that I wasn't interested in opening up to anyone again. But as I sat there listening to Sarah, I realized something important. I wasn't the same person I had been when I was with Jim. I had healed, grown stronger, and become the woman I was meant to be. I didn't need anyone to complete me, but maybe, just maybe, I was open to sharing my life with someone who appreciated me for who I was. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I think I'm still figuring it all out, but I'm open to the idea. I guess that's a start." Sarah smiled, her eyes twinkling with understanding. "Well, I think that's more than enough. When the time is right, it'll happen. And if not, that's okay too. You've got everything you need, Margaret. You're enough, just as you are." Her words stuck with me long after we parted ways. She was right. I had everything I needed within myself. I didn't need to rush into anything, least of all a relationship. I had my freedom, my peace, and a life that was mine to shape. If love was meant to be part of that journey, it would find its way in its own time. The final piece of the puzzle came one evening when I stood in front of a mirror, taking in the reflection that had once felt so foreign to me. The woman staring back at me was different than the one I had been just a year ago. She was stronger, more confident, and most importantly, at peace with who she was. I had learned that life wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment or the perfect person. It wasn't about seeking validation or approval from others. It was about living authentically, making decisions that aligned with my own values, and embracing the freedom that comes with owning your story. I thought back to the times when I had been lost, when I had believed that I wasn't enough, that I needed someone else to validate my existence. I had let Jim's departure and Carol's manipulations define my worth for so long. But now I knew better. I was enough. I had always been enough. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of the past finally lift off my shoulders, I smiled. The future was wide open, and I was ready to embrace it. I had fought for my freedom, my peace, and my happiness. I had learned to stand up for myself, to prioritize my own well-being, and to live life on my own terms. And no one, not Jim, not Carol, and certainly not the ghosts of my past, could take that away from me. The woman in the mirror wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving, and she had finally found the life she was meant to live.